There's a whole like superstition based around if you crack an egg and 2 yolks come out, it's like a sign that you could possibly be having a baby. A baby is in the future or a baby is coming. And the reason why I say this and why I know it's low-key true is because around the time where Abby found out that she was pregnant with Isabella, she kept cracking eggs and she kept telling me, why the fuck do I keep cracking the eggs and 2 yolks come out every single fucking time, bro? She got like 2 yolks at least 6 times, bro. Back to back, back to back.
God damn.
And around that time, like I said, she was having
Signs of being pregnant.
Exactly. Let me know if you guys have ever heard about that superstition.
I feel like it's probably just like a coincidence.
Yeah, it could just be a coincidence.
Hopefully it's a coincidence and like no fucking condom is broken or whatever.
These are people who killed animals reacting to their sentence. This is Alicia Concholi, and she burned a raccoon alive. And the most messed up part is she recorded the entire thing. I don't recommend watching the video at all because it is very disturbing. But what I'm about to show you is Alicia reacting to the sentence that she got for committing this awful and inhumane crime.
And the first video is of this raccoon, and I know you describe it as some nuisance or menacing animal, and all you see is this little raccoon face looking up at the screen. And when humans deliberately make animals suffer, there is a justifiable cause for concern. You sealed your own fate when it came to how the public will forever perceive you. You will not be allowed to own or possess any pets. You will need to surrender those within the next 30 days at this point. Oh, well, I'll tell you that. Your sentence is 45 days in the Sarasota County Jail. However, if you successfully perform 45 days on the Sheriff's Work Offender Program and complete that, I was going to make you do it in 180 days, and they can't coordinate that, so it's 315 according to their math. If you fail to complete that, you will automatically be arrested and sentenced without any further hearings.
Nothing scares me more than when someone vanishes into thin air. Hannah Kobayashi disappeared on November 11th after missing her flight at LAX. But before she disappeared, she sent a string of bizarre text messages. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance are strange, so let's talk about it. So on November 8th of this year, Hannah flew from her home in Maui to Los Angeles, and her plan was to then get on a connecting flight to New York to visit family and attend a concert. Hannah was super excited to go to this concert and to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, as she is an aspiring photographer and a really good one at that. She spent thousands of dollars on this trip well in advance, so she was super excited about it. But after landing at LAX, Hannah accidentally missed her connecting flight to New York, so to kill time while waiting for a last-minute flight to open up, she decided to go into downtown Los Angeles to sightsee. To be more specific, she went to the Grove Shopping Center, which is about 10 miles away from the airport. On November 9th, Hannah was seen at a bookstore called Taschin, and a day later, she attended a Nike event in the same area where she took this photo. She's also seen in the background of a YouTube video at the same event. On November 11th, Hannah's mom texted her asking if she had made it to New York yet, in which Hannah replied, not yet. This is when things start to get strange. Hannah's friends and family then began receiving a string of bizarre text messages from Hannah's phone. In one text to a friend, Hannah said that she got tricked into pretty much giving away all of her funds from someone she thought she loved. In another text, she said, quote, "Deepackers wiped my identity, stole all of my funds, and have had me in a mind since Friday." End quote. The last time anyone heard from Hannah was this final text. She said she had a spiritual awakening, was charging her phone, and then heading back to the airport to go to New York. She said she might need some help getting there, and then it's a long story, but she told her family that she was scared. After this, Hannah vanished, and no one has heard from her since. Her phone soon went dead, but what's odd is that her family and friends say that these last texts don't really sound like her. She was reportedly calling them hun and babe, which is something that she doesn't really ever say. Her final post on Instagram was the same day, and it was a photo she took at the Nike event the day prior. After a while of not hearing from Hannah and the odd text messages coming from her phone, her family reported her missing to the Los Angeles Police Department. During the investigation, police found that Hannah's phone last pinged at 4 p.m. on November 11th at LAX, which is the day she was sending those weird texts. But after this, her phone went dead. Adding to the mystery is the fact that before she disappeared, Hannah sent money via Venmo to 2 separate people, who her family does not recognize. Recently, surveillance footage has emerged that shows Hannah the night she went missing, but it only brings more questions than answers. On the evening of November 11th, well after her phone died, Hannah was seen on security footage near the crypto arena, which is about 20 miles from the airport. Her family says that from that footage, it's clear that she wasn't in good condition. Hannah was then seen later that same night on security footage at the Hawthorne Lennox light rail station. She was not alone this time though. She was with an unknown man, and according to her family, she looked really tired and disassociated. It's not clear what happened to Hannah after this, and it's like she vanished into thin air, but her family believes that she's been abducted. The FBI is now involved in this case, and there have been multiple searches for Hannah, but she is still missing. Authorities are in the process of getting any extra security footage that they can find, as well as her phone records and bank statements. They're also trying to access all of her social media accounts to see if that can provide any clues into what happened to her. One thing that's important to note is that Hannah's ex-boyfriend was also traveling on that same flight from Maui to Los Angeles. They didn't sit together or even speak on the flight though, but he went because they'd already booked this trip prior to breaking up. He has reportedly been cooperative with authorities and Hannah's family, and he did board that connecting flight to New York that Hannah missed. I just wanted to point that out because it will come up when you research Hannah's case. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is that Hannah's family says that she doesn't suffer from any mental illness, and she's not on any medication that could possibly cause her to have an adverse reaction or anything like that. It's now been over a week since Hannah made any contact with her family, which is extremely out of character for her. She would never just leave her family like this. If you're in the downtown Los Angeles area or possibly even Skid Row or Compton, please keep your eyes peeled. These are some of her characteristics and what she was last seen wearing. You can also join this Facebook group to keep up with information directly from the family. If you have any information, please contact the number on the screen.
Looks can be completely deceiving, and the woman you just saw in that video hugging and loving on her child actually murdered her own daughter. So this is Nicola Priest and her then boyfriend Callum Redford. The two had been dating for a while, and they had to raise Nicola's daughter from a past relationship, a girl named Kaylee Jade Priest. Now, on the night that all of this happened, Nicola and her boyfriend Callum went to the bedroom to do stuff. But according to them, Kaylee, the daughter, did not want to go to bed. She wanted to stay up and play. So the two of them decided to abuse Kaylee to death. Kaylee, as it turned out, died from severe abdominal and chest injuries. Authorities claim that it looked like Kaylee's body had been hit by a car going 40 miles per hour, or injuries that were comparable to falling 3 stories onto a concrete floor. That's how horrific and violent this abuse and assault was. Nicola was very active on TikTok with her daughter, where she was trying to gain a following, constantly posting little videos of her daughter, saying how much she loved her, but it was all one big lie. Now, this will piss you off. Nicola got 15 years in prison, and Callum got 14 years in prison for the murder of Nicola's daughter. And as this happened 3 years ago, that means that they'll be out in about a decade, back into British society. I don't know why the UK's court systems are like this, and why people like this keep, doing these things and are able to get out pretty quickly. But this is absolutely horrific, and the British public should make sure that these two's faces are remembered when they are released from prison. There are so many more details that I couldn't get into because it's so graphic, like the fact that Kaylee was found with what they called historical injuries, meaning that she had been being abused for a long period of time before her actual death. But regardless, rest in peace to Kaylee Jade. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Murder in America. It's available on all streaming platforms.
Nudist resort, 2 deceased victims, and a massive police standoff with a man threatening more destruction. It sounds like a far-fetched film, but this actually happened in California. It was the 29th of August. Police were deeply concerned for the welfare of an elderly couple living in a nudist resort in Redlands, California. Dan and Stephanie Menard, in their 70s, had disappeared from their trailer. Their little dog Cuddles had also vanished. The pair were described as wonderful, warm people, and it was completely out of character for them to just vanish. They were long-time residents of the Olive Dell Ranch RV Park and Resort, and unsettlingly, their car had been discovered with the key in the ignition and it had just been abandoned. Then a disturbing call came into the police. The caller said they were a family member of a man named Michael Sparks. Now, he also lived at the resort, and turned out he was their next door neighbour. He apparently confessed to killing an elderly couple, although he didn't admit that it was this elderly couple, and was threatening to unalive himself. Officers locked down the entire community and got a loudhailer and were trying to make contact with Michael but had no luck. Then more news. Police heard that Michael had apparently barricaded himself into his property with weapons. A huge police standoff began and officers had to send a drone in to examine the property. However, even with the use of the drone, they still couldn't see if Michael was actually inside. They ended up getting an armoured police vehicle to literally ram down the front of the property. Turns out Michael was in fact inside and had tried to unalive himself with a rifle, but it had misfired. He was detained and taken into custody and is charged with 2 counts of murder. On Michael's property, a grim discovery was made. There were bags of what was deemed to be human remains that were tragically identified as the missing couple. A coroner determined they had died from blunt force trauma, but it is not known what the motive was. Sadly, no one knows where their dog Cuddles is.
So obviously weird things that people see in the Appalachian Mountains. People say skinwalkers, wendigos. I don't know if you know what a wendigo is.
Yeah, I do.
Do you know how it looks like?
I don't know how it looks like, but I know that they have so much hunger that it can't be satisfied.
Specifically for human flesh that it can't be satisfied. The concept of a wendigo comes from a different indigenous groups in North America. The stories that were told from them are completely different from what we've seen nowadays. Although the depiction of the wendigo is accurate in the sense of there were once humans who had turned into cannibals, and it's more also transformation of the soul. Basically lose your humanity. Their skin would become gray. They would have no lips. They would have cuts on their bodies. They had gaunt, emaciated faces, and the smell of rotting flesh would linger because of their skin. Their skin would be deteriorating to the point where you could see their bones. It didn't matter who they would eat. They would eat a family member, a friend, as long as it satisfied their needs. And then why they decided to eat humans? If you were a shitty hunter and you had no animal to eat, or if it was wintertime, there was barely any animals to catch, they will resort to eating human flesh. And then from then on, you would get banished from your tribe. This is what people think a wendigo looks like, that you probably have seen before.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
That's how a wendigo is supposed to look like.
What the fuck?
Yeah. I know the game Until Dawn, they did like a really good, accurate depiction of what a wendigo is.
These are the most disturbing videos on TikTok, and this is a massive trigger warning. In February 2022, a TikToker by the name of Beanbag Adventures arrived at a structure that seemed completely abandoned. Locally, this place was known as the lavatory. Upon entering the building, Beanbag Adventures was completely overwhelmed by a very strong odor, despite the respiratory he was wearing. So he followed the stench and it led him down to the basement and into a strange room, and it's there that he would make a disturbing discovery. A pool of stagnant liquid containing the remains of children, and not just children, we are talking about newborn babies. Now, at first, when the video was released, there was a debate about how real the footage was. As he said in the video, he found movie props. But that was likely an attempt to prevent the graphic footage from being deleted. But having seen the video, it's pretty convincing and would have to have been very costly to fake. Another indication of its authenticity is that in the high quality footage, maggots and insects are clearly on and around the bodies. After he posted the first video, he went back to business as usual, but in December 2022, he went back and what he captured silenced most of the doubters. Because this time, things changed. There was children's clothes scattered all on the floor, and a pile of glass bottles appeared, and within the pool itself were even more corpses. And many bodies that were recognizably the same were now further decomposed than before. This was either a very well put together hoax or it was real. Many people were even quick to discover that the bottles found appeared to be formaldehyde, a chemical used for the preservation of bodies. After the second video went viral, many believed that there was a serial killer on the loose or a group of killers, but others were still convinced it was a trick. Now, I obviously can't show the video on blurred, but it's not hard to find it at all if you want to watch it. So if you decide to watch it, let me know your thoughts on it and if you think it's real. Nonetheless, this video is absolutely disturbing, and it's definitely one of the most disturbing videos on TikTok that I've seen. Also, if you guys have any suggestions on videos you want me to cover on TikTok, just let me know.
I don't think I will ever recover after learning about what happened to Annalise Michel and listening to the audio tapes of her exorcism. On July 1st, 1976, 23-year-old Annalise Michel would die after undergoing 67 exorcisms over the span of 10 months for demonic possession. What she experienced leading up to her death is horrifying. So Annalise lived in West Germany with her 3 sisters and parents, and they grew up very religious as Roman Catholics, and they went to Mass twice a week. When she was 16 years old, she suddenly blacked out at school and walked around around in a trance-like state. Her parents didn't quite understand why, but a year later she blacked out once again. She was in bed this time and woke up in another trance-like state, having wet the bed. Her parents then took her to the doctor where she was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. She was then put on a string of medication to try and treat both, but nothing worked. And she was eventually also diagnosed with depression. By 20 years old, Annalise's mental condition got even worse, and it was at this point that she refused to be around anyone or anything religious. In 1970, she had a devastating third seizure, and after this, she started seeing the devil everywhere she went, and she would hear voices telling her that she was damned and that she was going to rot in hell. After 5 years of no improvement on medication, Annalise and her parents began to think that she was possessed by a demon. So they appealed to the Catholic Church for an exorcism, but initially they were rejected. They lost all hope in traditional doctors and medication, and eventually they stopped going to the doctor altogether. But in that time frame, Annalise's behavior grew more and more terrifying. She became incredibly aggressive and would hurt herself. She drank her own urine and would eat insects and crawl under tables. It got so bad that she even barked like a dog for 2 days, would compulsively do up to 400 squats a day, and even bit the head off of a dead bird. She would then resort to growling and was then taken to a commune. During her time there, she couldn't even be in the same room as a crucifix, and she would refuse to drink holy water. When she would walk up to the shrine, she physically couldn't enter because she said that the soil burned like fire and she couldn't take it any longer. Annalise said that when she looked around at the others praying, it looked like they were gnashing their teeth at her. It was there that she was determined to be suffering from demonic possession. In 1975, the family finally got approval from a local bishop to begin performing exorcisms, but this was ordered to be in total secrecy. The exorcisms would be performed by 2 priests and started in late September of 1975. Over the next 10 months, Annalise would be subjected to 1 or 2 exorcisms a week, and those would last up to 4 hours long. In total, she underwent 67 exorcisms, and the audio tapes from them are terrifying.
Nein, ich sag's nicht. Aber das Ding, das gäbe Sachen in die Drecksau, die das haben ihn eingepflanzt.
Meinst du, die habe ich von mir enorm?
Ja, ja!
So müssen wir sagen, dass das andere.
During these exorcisms, Annalise said that she was possessed by these 6 demons, and one thing that she said will forever haunt me. She said, quote, "People are as stupid as pigs. They think it's all over after death. It goes on," end quote. These exorcisms were so violent that she broke both of her knees and had ripped the tendons from continually kneeling in prayer. She also began refusing to eat food. On July 1st, 1976, 10 months after the first exorcism, Annalise died. Her official cause of death was from malnutrition and dehydration. She was in a state of near starvation for nearly a year, and she weighed only 66 pounds. Because of the state she was in, Annalise's parents and the 2 priests performing the exorcisms were arrested, and their case went to trial. At the trial, doctors argued that Annalise wasn't ever possessed, and that the manifestations of demonic possession were a psychological effect of her strict religious upbringing and her epilepsy. The defense argued that nothing they did was illegal, and in court they played the audio tapes from the exorcisms to prove that she was indeed possessed. They also said that Annalise was finally freed of demonic possession right before she died. It was proven that her death could have been prevented, and all parties were found guilty of negligent homicide. The priests were sentenced to 6 months in jail, but that was later reduced to 3 years probation and having to pay a fine. Although her parents were found guilty, under German law, they weren't charged because they'd already suffered enough. Several years after the exorcism of Annalise Michel, the Catholic Church took back the claim that she was ever possessed. I first learned about this case after watching this movie, which is loosely based on Annalise, and the movie still, to this day, scares me so bad. This is actually the only topic that I am genuinely scared to talk about. Like, it is such bad energy.
This grown man dated a 12-year-old and then they killed her entire family. It was 2006 in Alberta in Canada. Jasmine Richardson was a 12-year-old girl who lived at home with her mum, her dad, and her little brother Tyler. Now, initially, Jasmine was a straight A student. She was really popular, people described her as very bright, and she loved socializing and spending time with friends. Now, as most children do, Jasmine grew up to kind of experiment with her clothes and her hairstyles and things, and almost like developed into this goth/emo phase. However, this phase would turn darker than anyone would imagine. In February that year, Jasmine met a man named Jeremy Steinck at a local shopping centre. Now, he was actually a lot older than her at 23 years of age. However, he claimed to be a 300-year-old werewolf. In just a couple of months, things would escalate to a devastating degree. Jeremy had a dark past. His mum had struggled with substance issues, and she and her boyfriends and people she would bring into the house would abuse Jeremy. Now, this is by no means an excuse or a reason why he eventually ended up not only dating a child, but also the horrific crimes he would go on to commit. Now, both Jeremy and Jasmine started expressing extreme anger towards their parents. This was despite Jasmine actually having a fairly nice upbringing. They started hanging out more and more, and Jasmine got way more rebellious and started doing poorly at school. Now, Jasmine also started to resent her little brother, and on some occasions was asked to babysit him and ended up just leaving him in the house on his own. Her parents were understandably concerned about her, so they started doing a little bit of digging on her computer to see what on earth she was doing on there. They ended up finding messages between the 12-year-old and the adult Jeremy. They were obviously really horrified by this and banned her from speaking to Jeremy and also grounded her. They thought they were keeping their little girls safe. Little did they know they were just pushing them closer together and making them more angry. In April that year, they concocted a sickening plan which they carried out on the 23rd of the month. That morning, Jeremy arrived at the family house, both under the influence of alcohol and substances. He was armed with knives and had a mask over his face. He snuck inside the house, but Deborah heard something and went downstairs to investigate. Suddenly, she came across Jeremy, and before she knew what on earth had happened, he had lunged at her, stabbing her several times. Mark, the dad, then came downstairs, and he'd armed himself with a screwdriver by now. He managed to launch it at Jeremy's eye. However, Jeremy did stab Mark too, and unfortunately, he passed away as well. The little brother was terrified at this point and was actually upstairs and could hear everything that was going on. There are mixed accounts of what happens next. Jeremy said that Jasmine did the next part, and Jasmine said that Jeremy did the next part. One of them ended up stabbing and killing the little brother Tyler. Jeremy then fled the absolute bloodbath in his car, and Jasmine got to work cleaning the knife. She then stole her deceased mum's credit card and got a taxi to where Jeremy was staying. Once reunited, they had S, or essentially Jeremy R'd this child. They then just casually went to a house party knowing that the family members lay deceased in the family home. It's alleged that at the party they bragged about the killings and Jeremy showed off his eye injury. Horrifically, the following day, a little boy went to the house to try and play with Tyler, and when he knocked on the door, he noticed something through the window. It looked like a body. He obviously immediately alerted his mum, who rang police. Police showed up and found the horrific crime scene and realised that the girl from the house was missing. They put out an Amber Alert to try and find her. Meanwhile, she and Jeremy hid. They were eventually tracked down at a convenience store and were apprehended. Now, Jeremy was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and eventually was given life in prison, but Jasmine was not tried as an adult and only got 10 years. She was released from prison in 2016 and is now a free woman.
The woman you just saw in that video leading the class, 26-year-old Reagan Gray, turned out to be a pedophile. Just last month, Reagan was arrested for having an inappropriate relationship with one of the 15-year-olds that she was in charge of at her church. At the time of the abuse, Reagan was teaching at the Little Rock Christian Academy and volunteered for her church Emmanuel Baptist student ministry. So basically, Reagan tried her hardest to work around as many children as possible. Who knows what kind of horrific thoughts were running through her mind at all times when she was around these kids. Reagan, before her arrest, was a woman of God, someone who devoted her life to living a pure, holy life. But in 2020, the parents of a student allegedly found text messages between his teacher and himself. Keep in mind, he was a minor. They confronted Reagan about it. She said she would cut off all communication with the kid, and she insisted that it had never been physical. However, in a counseling session in 2023, Gray herself admitted that the relationship had been physical and sexual. And after she ratted on herself, an arrest affidavit was secured, and she was eventually arrested. Now, the teenage victim would actually state that Reagan would send him naughty photographs every single day while they were communicating. They also said that they kept their activity to only stuff using the mouth because she said that she and the student needed to stay pure, which is just disgusting. But this church has had a lot of scandals this year. The same church in March of this year revealed that the children's former assistant children's program director, a man named Patrick Stephen Miller, had had an inappropriate relationship with 2 young girls, and he had assaulted them while they were inside of the church. Hopefully the legal system hands this woman a punishment that goes along with the severity of this crime. But in America, you really never know. She'll probably get 2 years and be out on the street again to victimize more young children. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms like Apple Podcasts. One of P. Diddy's favorite groups to victimize was young children, and they were as young as 9 years old. Yes, in a lawsuit filed last month, a 9-year-old boy accused P. Diddy of graping him, as well as a slew of other charges. There's also a group of dozens of minors who are suing P. Diddy, alleging they were abused as well. And as this thing just continues to balloon and explode, I'm sure there's going to be dozens, if not hundreds more children that come forward with these horror stories about what this man did to them. But why did no one listen to these kids? How come nobody heard a single thing? Nobody saw anything. I mean, it's really disturbing. Interviews with people who have attended Diddy's parties also keep coming out, including an interview that was just released today, in which a woman named Tania Wallace claims that I saw children dressed up in Barbie outfits during a P. Diddy freak-off party. I mean, what the f***? I mean, it's just incredibly disturbing. And clearly, P. Diddy was tied or connected to people that enabled this behavior, whether these people were contacts in the United States government or in the Hollywood elite. But he was allowed to do these things for a very, very long time. And keep in mind, he had hundreds, if not thousands of victims that never spoke out for some reason or another. I wonder why that is. Actually, I'll tell you why, and it's my theory, is that P. Diddy was a blackmail agent, kind of like the notorious Jeffrey Epstein, and the United States authorities viewed him as a blackmail bank, meaning that he had blackmail on all of these celebrities, all these different people that he was involved with, and they could harvest and harness that blackmail to use for some sort of political gain or means, and in return, they would give P. Diddy pretty much immunity across the board. That is until the first victim started speaking their mind and making all of this public, and in these cases, when one domino falls, all of them fall. But this isn't the end, and if you want to hear me cover stories like this, listen to my podcast, The Conspiracy Files, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also watch the video version on YouTube. And in the next few weeks, I'm doing a Diddy documentary. I have access to some Diddy materials that have never been seen by the public, and it's going to get very, very disturbing.
This is the Brazilian beach murder, one of the worst things I've ever covered explained. The case that I'm about to explain to you is one of the worst from Brazil, and this murder was described by the Brazilian media as a deranged crime of passion fueled by jealousy and the desire for revenge. The crime took place on the 25th of June 2019 in Brazil. 2 teenagers who were 15 at the time teamed up to kill a fellow teenager who was 14 to 15. The pair also recorded the horrific crime and uploaded it to social media. But what makes this case even more shocking is that this occurred in broad daylight, in a well-populated area, which resulted in numerous witnesses and the capture of the 2 murderous teens. The victim's family then went to identify the body, and they revealed that one of the murderers had a relationship with the victim and was not happy with how it ended at all, which resulted in months of cyber stalking and threats. After moving on from this relationship, the victim would start talking to a local boy. However, her becoming involved with a new partner, which seemed to push her ex over the edge. More and more threats came, and on the 25th of June 2019, the victim was walking home from school when she was located by her ex and his new partner. And she was then taken to the beach and murdered plain in sight of onlookers. And due to the age of the killers, the trial and sentencing was kept from the public eye. But now, what I'm about to explain to you is the video that the 2 killers posted to social media, and this is a massive, massive trigger warning, and I advise you to never go searching for it. As you play the video, you are met with the sight of 2 teenagers, one of which is female and the other is the ex-partner of the victim. and they are standing over the poor teenager who has already been subjected to a beating as her shirt is covered in blood. They are at the beach and the female can be seen dragging the victim by the hair into the sea while beating her with her free hand. The person filming is the ex-partner of the victim and can be heard saying, "Are you sorry now? Are you sorry now?" The victim is then dragged into the ocean and lets out one of the worst screams you will ever hear. The girl who dragged the victim into the ocean then attempts to drown her by holding her head under the water. This continues for a while. The victim has her head plunged underwater while being held down, before having her head raised back above the surface. At one point, her head is held under the water for almost a minute straight. And due to her injuries, as the tide flows in and out, you see streaks of blood in the water. The victim is then raised above the surface and punched in the face multiple times. The person filming, who is the victim's ex-partner, then gets a kitchen knife and stabs the victim multiple times in the hand and the back of the neck. After this, the girl then resumes trying to drown the victim as her ex-partner can be heard screaming, "Drown her, drown her." They fail at drowning her because of the tide and bring her to a rock in the sea and then try to bash her head against it. The person filming then gets the knife and stabs the victim again multiple times. This time, however, the stab wounds were way more severe as the water around the victim turns much bloodier. The victim at this point then sadly dies and her body is dragged out of the sea, and you then hear people in the distance and they confront the two teen killers. Multiple people arrive, stopping them from leaving, and they ask the killers what they did to the girl. And they then said they killed her for betrayal. And this is where the video concludes. What makes this case even worse is the killers will barely be punished due to the laws in Brazil surrounding these types of cases. This case is extremely depressing and traumatic, and it's definitely one of the most sickening ones I've covered. May that young girl rest in peace. She did not deserve that at all.
She was strangled to the point that her neck was broken by her teacher, who then left her for dead in the woods. He was recently released from prison, and the video of them finding her is absolutely horrifying. This is the disturbing case of Ashley Reeves. On April 27th, 2006, 17-year-old Ashley Reeves told her parents that she was going to a job interview. So she took her boyfriend's car and then left her Belleville, Illinois home. But in all reality, Ashley was actually going to meet up with 26-year-old Samson Shelton, who at the time was a driver's ed teacher, but he had previously been a teacher at her middle school. Unbeknownst to everyone, the two had been having an intimate relationship together. At least that's what Samson says. What he was actually doing was grooming and abusing her since she was a minor. So when a few hours passed and Ashley never came home, her parents immediately reported her missing to the police. They then found the car Ashley was driving abandoned on the side of the road, and in it were the clothes that she was supposed to be wearing to the job interview. At this point, everyone knew that Ashley was in danger, so her mom started combing through her phone records to see who she'd been talking to in the days leading up to her disappearance. One number stood out, and it belonged to Samson. So when her mom called him, Samson said that he had no idea where Ashley was and hung up on her. At this point in time, he was line dancing at a country bar. Friends of Ashley's came forward and told police that she'd been seeing an older man and had planned to meet him the night she disappeared. This was enough evidence to bring Samson in for questioning, which is exactly what the police did. It would take 12 hours of interrogating for him to begin confessing, but at first he admitted that he was with her the day she went missing. But he said that they had had an argument while he was driving, and he kicked her out of the car, leaving her behind. He said he didn't do a single thing to hurt her. A few more hours would go by before he confessed to everything. He admitted to having an intimate relationship with Ashley, but said that she was persistent and that she was the one who pursued him for a long time. He then admitted to having an argument the day she went missing while they were driving. He said he tried to end things with her and she got mad, so he put her in a chokehold, which ended up breaking her neck. Samson said that her whole body went limp, and in a panic, he dumped her body in a wooded area in Citizens Park. He said that he wanted to make it look like she had been strangled in the woods. So to emphasize this, he put his belt around her neck and strangled her repeatedly. At one point, he was pulling the belt so tight around her neck that it actually broke. Thinking she was dead, he left her in the woods and then went line dancing at the country bar. This is when he spoke to Ashley's mom on the phone. She was looking for her daughter and he had just gotten done brutally strangling her. Yet he decided to go line dancing, not having a single care in the world. So Samson told police where Ashley's body was, and when they went looking for her, they fully expected her to be dead. After 40 minutes in the pouring rain and complete darkness, police stumbled across Ashley's body, but somehow she was still alive, even after having her neck broken and being strangled repeatedly. On top of that, she was left alone in the woods with her injuries freeze for 30 hours, but she was alive. Authorities didn't think she was going to survive because she suffered severe brain trauma from the attack, but she did. She spent the next year relearning how to swallow, walk, and talk, and although she doesn't remember much from that day, she is alive. Sampson was then arrested where he pleaded guilty to attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but he was released a couple of months ago after having only served 17. He was given the earliest possible release allowed by the law, which is just crazy to me. He is clearly a danger to society. He will spend the next 3 years on parole and is banned from having any contact with Ashley. I feel like this isn't justice, and I can't even imagine how Ashley feels knowing that he is a free man. He hasn't shown any remorse, and even during the interrogation, he only cared about himself. He literally asked the detective if he would have a private toilet in prison because he can't pee in front of anyone else. Meanwhile, Ashley was laying there, slowly dying. What he did was deranged, and everyone in Illinois should know his face and be careful around him.
Disturbing episode of La Rosa de Guadalupe.
Ooh.
This episode was about Justin Bieber, right?
Really?
Justin Bieber was going to be in Monterrey, Mexico. And a lot of people were going crazy over Justin Bieber tickets. Like all the teenage girls wanting to see all their crush. It starts off with these girls. They're around the age of 13 to 14. Super hardcore believers. If you see in the room, they literally have like pictures all over. So obviously they want to get tickets as well. The tickets are like 2,000 pesos, which is like $100 and something US. Rosaura is like, oh, I don't want my quince anymore.
I'm really wondering when the fuck this is going.
So Lolita, she's even like, oh, I'm gonna get a job. She ends up getting a job at a little cafe. They find out these tickets are getting sold online as a pre-sale. And they're like, fuck, how are we even gonna get the ticket? The girls end up saying like, yo, we should camp for them. And they stay there all fucking night. The next morning comes, they're sold out. And then out of nowhere, Rosada is like, I'm gonna put on social media, is there anybody who has a ticket? I will give them my virginity for a ticket.
I had a feeling it was gonna end like
and
this.
she ends up gaslighting her into saying
She should do it too.
She's like, you're right, I have to do whatever it takes to see Justin Bieber. A couple days pass and like some guy tries to approach Lolita at her job. She's like, what are you doing, 30? And he's like, you're the one who posted this shit on social media, what the fuck? Out of nowhere, her friend Rosaura comes to school with a fucking ticket all hyping. Another girl that has a ticket as well is like, let me see your ticket. They compare it to each other. Your ticket kind of looks off. They go to like the booth and shit to make sure if it's real or not. They scan it and it's like, nah, like this ticket doesn't work. It's fake. She goes to the guy.
Loving stepfather or a sinister predator. When a teenager vanished, some people thought she'd run away. That was until police made some absolutely shocking discoveries at the family home. Alyssa Turney was just 3 years old and was living in Phoenix, Arizona when her mum split up from her dad. It was a sad time for her mum Barbara, obviously Alyssa, and also her older brother. Barbara really wanted them to be a family unit. Lo and behold, she then met a man called Michael. He seemed like a really nice guy and he'd previously worked as a sheriff's deputy. He had 3 sons himself, so all of a sudden the families combined and became one big happy family. In 1988, the family grew even more when they welcomed a new baby girl called Sarah. As years went on, Michael was working as an electrician when one day he had a terrible accident. He actually fell off a roof and sustained a really nasty injury. It's thought this had a big impact on his mental health. And the family was hit with another tragedy when mum Barbara died from cancer at just 34 years old. After Barbara's death, the family seemed to notice that Michael changed towards Alyssa. They said he was obsessively watching over his stepdaughter and sometimes was actually physically watching her with binoculars out the window. His behaviour, it's reported, escalated to worrying levels, with him setting up security cameras so he could watch when she came to and from work. Now, he argued that this was necessary and she'd been misbehaving at school, but others said that she was just kind of rebelling because she was really struggling with the death of her mum. By this point, Michael's other kids had grown up and grown out of the family home, apart from Sarah. But he didn't seem to be scrutinising Sarah in the same way that he scrutinised Alyssa. On the 17th of May 2001, it was Alyssa's last day of school, and Michael claimed that he dropped her off at Paradise Valley High School that morning the same as any other day, and then picked her up for lunch. He claimed that they then had an argument and she ran off on her own. Her sister Sarah then discovered a note apparently written by Alyssa in her bedroom which stated she was running away to California. Now, Sarah wasn't actually really very concerned at this point because she thought this was genuine. However, Alyssa had left behind her phone, her belongings, and her car, so there was really no way of her getting to California very quickly. Her bank account also was untouched, even though she had nearly $2,000 in there. There was absolutely no news from Alyssa at all. No one heard anything from her, and she failed to turn up to a party that she was excited to attend. Things weren't looking good, but police said that they didn't suspect foul play. They simply put this down to a runaway teen, which they see every day. Then it seemed there was a glimmer of hope. About a week after her disappearance on the 24th of the month, Michael claimed that he got a call from a California number, and when he answered, it was his stepdaughter who swore down the phone and then just put the phone down on him. Was this actually true? Would she really go to the effort of making a call from California, just swearing and then putting the phone down? Or do you think that Michael may have made this up to potentially keep the hope alive that she was alive? Months and then eventually years went by with no news of Alyssa, and nobody knew if she'd run away of her own accord or had been murdered. Then in 2006 there was some distressing news. A convicted killer who was actually already in jail named Thomas Heimer told a prison guard that he was the one who had killed her. However, when police did some digging, they determined this to be a false confession, like they get so often from current prisoners. As years went by, people started wondering whether somebody close to Alyssa knew more than they were letting on. Suspicion fell on Michael, the stepdad. Now, in 2008, authorities decided to try and search the family home, but Michael was uncooperative. They had to get a search warrant and in the end absolutely swarm the home. Once inside, what they found was shocking. There were homemade B-bombs, 19 rifles, multiple knives, and a van full of petrol. They also strangely found a secret diary of Michael's, which included plans to drive a van of explosives into a public place. He documented his plans to kill people and then unalive himself. In the house, police also found loads and loads of CCTV that Michael had taken of his stepdaughter, including disturbingly a video of Alyssa and her boyfriend together. Very tellingly, there was no actual footage of the day she vanished. That still wasn't everything though. There was a really weird contract that was discovered. It was written by Michael, and he'd made Alyssa sign this document to say he hadn't abused her. Police then spoke to Alyssa's friends who had a different story. They claimed that Michael had in fact essayed her multiple times, and in one alleged incident, Alyssa said she woke up to Michael on top of her and she'd been tied to a chair. Police ended up jailing Michael for 10 years for the possessions of all of those weapons. He ended up being released in 2017, but the fight for justice for Alyssa wasn't over. Alyssa's sister Sarah ended up confronting her dad on his release. This ended in a heated discussion in which Michael allegedly told Sarah he would confess on his deathbed. This seemed enough to get him arrested and charged with second-degree murder, despite there still being no body found. Now, tragically, although family thought that they were going to finally get some answers and justice in this case, Michael was acquitted after a short trial due to lack of evidence. Though there were obviously allegations against Michael and some really disturbing behaviour, there was no concrete evidence to actually convict him of killing Alyssa. He maintains his innocence to this day, and Alyssa's case is still unsolved.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This man murdered his girlfriend and then died of a heart attack while he was burying her. In May 2022, locals rang police after they noticed a man unresponsive in his garden. Police in South Carolina raced to the scene and they found the body of 60-year-old Joseph McKinnon. He was found lying next to a big hole in the ground that he'd been digging. It also became apparent that his girlfriend Patricia was missing. Now, police tried and failed to get hold of her and then eventually found blood in the pair's home. When they questioned her work colleagues, it turned out that she hadn't turned up to work that day, and that was extremely unusual. When police did some further digging into the case, they discovered that actually the hole that Joseph was digging was a grave for Patricia. Joseph had attacked her and then wrapped her body up in bin bags. After killing her, he'd had a heart attack while trying to conceal her body.
Nothing could have prepared me for the end of this story. So when I was little, I used to always complain about a scratching noise coming from the room next to me. My dad actually converted the guest bedroom next to my room into a home office, and I was never allowed in there. He was a really busy man. One night, I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, when I thought I heard a small sob come from his office. I could faintly make out the sound of a woman crying, but I knew I wasn't allowed to go in there. And honestly, at that point, I was kind of too afraid to anyways. The next day I told my dad what I had heard, and he told me it was probably just a bad dream. But that didn't make any sense to me because I knew what I had heard. My dad spent the entire day in his office that day. I didn't see him come out once. The next night, I waited until my father was asleep, and I did what I knew I shouldn't do. I went into his office. And when I opened the door, there were no books. There was no desk. There wasn't even a single chair. Just scratched into the walls a million times. Help me.
These are 3 California creatures you never heard about. Up first is the Dark Watchers, and they're usually sighted in the mountains of California, and are described as tall, featureless, dark silhouettes, often wearing brimmed hats and having walking sticks. If you ever see a Dark Watcher, whatever you do, never approach it, because if you do, you will completely vanish forever. Next is Tahoe Tessie, who is a water creature and is living in Lake Tahoe. It's been described as having smooth skin, and is apparently so big it's the size of a bus. So next time you go to Lake Tahoe, you better look around for Tahoe Tessie. Finally is the Lone Pine Devil. This is also a creature who is often sighted in the mountains of California, and it's described as a large creature with both bird and reptile qualities. They have razor-sharp claws and venomous fangs. So what creature do you think the creepiest is? In my opinion, it has to be the Dark Watchers just because of how creepy and weird they sound. But either way, let me know which one is the scariest to you. Whatever you do, do not look into her eyes.
My father locked me in our basement for 11 days and claimed not to know I was there. My name is Charles Bothwell V. I was 12 years old in 2014 when my father, Charles Bothwell IV, still had custody of me and mistreated me. In June 2014, my father reported me missing. The police conducted an intensive search, but eventually I was found hidden in the basement of the family home, approximately 11 days after being reported missing. I lived in inhumane conditions. My parents deprived me of food, subjected me to repeated abuse and violence, and cut me off from all social contact. My father even pleaded for public assistance on television during my supposed disappearance, while he himself was the perpetrator. The case took a shocking turn when investigators discovered that my father was aware of my presence in the basement. Both my father and mother were arrested and charged with severe parental neglect. Investigators also found evidence of abuse against me. I was subsequently placed under the custody of Child Protective Services. My father was then sentenced to 18 months probation and ordered to take anger classes, and he will no longer be allowed to approach or contact me.
I threw my baby from the 4th floor. My name is Sonia Hermosillo, and I was 42 years old in 2011 when I committed the worst act. I had 3 children, including 2 little girls, and my baby No Medina, a 7-month-old boy with autism. My husband and my daughter had already noticed that since the birth of my son No, I had a different behavior. His illness and various health problems, such as the flat head that required him to wear a helmet all the time, had particularly affected me, and I often neglected the way I took care of him. That's why my husband decided not to leave me alone with our baby, but I took advantage of the fact that he was in the shower to take him and leave with him. That day, he was supposed to undergo tests at the hospital, so I drove there, and once I arrived, I parked on the 4th floor of the parking lot. Once out of the car, I thought that throwing him from the top of the 4 floors might be a good idea to see if he could survive. So I took him, removed the helmet he was supposed to wear, and threw him, and he died instantly. I was quickly arrested by the police. Once arrested, I said that all of this was due to mental problems. I confessed to the police that I killed him because of the problems he had. I was then sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole.
This is the time I was almost abducted by a serial killer. In February of 2012, I went to go visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death was a pretty hard thing for me to process, as he only died in March of 2011, so it was all still pretty new to me. I was kneeling in front of his grave, crying and thinking to myself, when all of a sudden I looked up and see a man running at me full speed from the woods in front of me. I was able to get myself to my truck pretty quickly before he got to me, but by the time I got in the truck, he was only about 50 feet away. I got in my car before he could get to me and locked the doors, much to his displeasure. He threw his hands up as if he had lost a football game. I started my truck and started driving out as fast as I could, but not before I passed him. I didn't break eye contact with him the entire time I was driving past, so I got a really good look at him. So cut to a few years later, I'm pretty bored at work, so I download this random app that has a bunch of paranormal, UFO, cryptid, and serial killer stories on it. And as I'm browsing through stories, I come across one that makes my heart absolutely drop. There was a photo of a man I recognized very well, Israel Keys, who was most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her, and throwing the pieces of her body in a lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. He had been killing for a few years, to the point where no one really knew what his actual death toll was, and he would eventually go on to take his own life in prison. At the end of this book I read about him, they mentioned his favorite places to abduct people: public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if he left any kill kits in that cemetery. You were fast, Israel, but I was faster.
This abandoned prison is straight out of a nightmare. Welcome to the Mid-Orange Correctional Facility in Warwick, New York. Originally opened as a reform school for boys, this sprawling complex was eventually turned into a prison for men. And over the years, it housed a number of deplorable criminals from New York State, including an infamous serial killer. As you walk the halls of this crumbling complex, you can feel the energy, you can feel the souls reaching out to try to talk to you. One of the more infamous spirits that haunts this property is that of a teenager named Jimmy. Obviously, back when this was a reform school for boys, abuse was rampant in these halls. And one teenager named Jimmy decided to take his own life by hanging himself in one of the buildings out back. Now, I can tell you from first-hand experience that this place is definitely haunted. I spent the night there ghost hunting while filming an episode of my show with the New York Post, which is available on YouTube now, and you could just feel the energy of these buildings emanating. I mean, there were a number of crazy historical things that happened here in these buildings, including a riot, and obviously tons of people lost their lives here over the years. I mean, the Mid-Orange Correctional Facility was known as one of the most violent prisons in the state of New York. And every single part of this complex is haunted, including this eerie church that was left abandoned after the building was closed. When this building sat empty for years, rituals were performed by people that broke in here, and the dark energy from these rituals still remains. If you want to see the full video that I filmed here, just head to the New York Post's YouTube channel, and for more spooky content, follow me on YouTube at The Paranormal Files.
This baby was kidnapped, and then the parents received the wrong baby back. In April 1964, Dora Fronzak gave birth to baby Paul. Although this should have been one of the happiest days of her life, it soon escalated into a nightmare. Paul was kidnapped. A woman posed as a nurse, and using her fake profession, she managed to steal Paul from the Chicago hospital. Word spread that the baby was missing, and 600 homes were frantically searched. Paul's parents made devastating pleas for his return. Now, police only had Paul's ear shape and blood type to go off. However, they did soon find an abandoned child in New Jersey. When Dora saw him, she was incredibly relieved. She had baby Paul back, and that would be the last of it for 10 years. One Christmas, when he was hunting for presents, 10-year-old Paul discovered a memory box, and inside this box were news clippings from his kidnapping. When he confronted his mum about this, she shut the conversation down, but it stayed in the back of his mind. Paul started to have doubts about his true history. In 2012, he did a DNA test, and the results shocked everyone. Paul was not the Paul who'd been kidnapped. He wasn't biologically related to either of his parents. Now, sadly, his parents were actually furious at Paul, and they refused to speak to him for a year. In 2015, Paul discovered that he was actually born as Jack, and he had a twin sister, Jill. His biological mum had a drinking problem, and his dad was a violent man. Meanwhile, the FBI ended up reopening the case of missing baby Paul. It was actually another home DNA test that revealed where he was. A man named Kevin Beatty was actually missing baby Paul. Now, the woman who raised him had actually passed away, so some mystery still remains about missing baby Paul. Tragically, in 2019, Dora actually arranged to meet her long-lost son, Kevin. However, before the pair could reunite, Kevin actually died of cancer. Paul's twin sister Jill is still missing. He continues to look for her, and you could actually help solve this cold case by taking home DNA tests and uploading your information onto gedmatch.com. We can all help to solve cold cases.
This is the backpacking beheadings, the tragic case of Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin. Before Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin embarked on their journey to Morocco, Louise posted on Facebook letting her friends know she would be making a trip to Morocco and was asking anyone out there if they knew about Mount Tubkul, and the theory is this post put the attackers on high alert, and apparently how the girls would become targets of the attackers. Nobody knows how true this is, but it's the leading theory. But the girls continued on their journey, and eventually as night fell, they set up camp to rest. During their hike, it's believed the attackers were stalking their victims, waiting for them to stop, waiting for them to get further away from civilization, and once this happened, the attacks ensued. The attack was brutal, and both Louise and Maureen were brutally beheaded, and some reports even claim the girls were sexually assaulted. The murder of Louise Jesperson was recorded and posted online. It's believed Marie Newlin was murdered first, but there's no video of that, though people online claim it's out there. The video starts with Louise Jesperson lying on her stomach, and she's wearing a t-shirt and underwear. And almost immediately, the terrorist attempts to behead her. But he starts from the back of the neck, and that usually isn't the way to do it. Right when he cuts, Louise says ow and begins to scream, and apparently in her native language she was begging for her mother. Once the man beheading her realizes it's hard to behead someone from behind, he then turns her over, and one of the people he was with stomps on her face to hold her down, and he then starts beheading her from the neck. And at this point, there's a lot of blood and a lot of screaming and gurgling. He then begins hacking at her neck to complete the beheading, and once he's beheaded Louise Jesperson, he picks up her head and takes it to her tent and places it inside, and the video concludes. It's a quick video, but it's extremely bloody, extremely horrible, and extremely sad. It's definitely one of the worst beheadings I ever covered, mainly because these girls were very young, very naive, and didn't deserve what happened to them at all. One of the girls even posted how the world is safe and that we shouldn't judge people, and it's super sad that they paid the price of this with their life. Please don't go looking for this video because it will stick with you forever and it's really not worth it. Rest in peace to Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin.
This is one of the most dangerous men in Canadian history, Shane Pattinson. And while he doesn't really look it on the outside, he really is a dangerous and twisted man. So in 2012, Shane was sentenced to 5 years in prison because he had collected over 4,500 CP images depicting the extreme essay of young girls under the age of 5. 4,500 images. So he served most of his prison sentence, and he was released in 2015 and was immediately sent to a halfway house with the Salvation Army. But just shortly after getting out of prison, when he went to the halfway house, investigators performed a routine check-in on him, and what they found was extremely shocking. When investigators checked in on Shane, they walked into the room, they found him naked from the waist down. He had 3 devices open, each of them displaying CP images, and he was actively toying with himself at the time that they walked in to these images. When these investigators performed searches on what Shane had in his room, they discovered that in the short time he was out from prison, he had already accrued thousands of additional CP images and was actively sharing them with other users across the internet. This means that he served his first sentence for CP possession. He got out and almost immediately went back to collecting it and obsessing over it. And like I said before, this guy had thousands of victims across the planet, and he was working his way into the dark web to connect with other pedophiles across the world. Now, Shane has a pretty disturbing life story. When he was only 3 years old, he allegedly played mommy and daddy with a 4-year-old cousin of his, a game which turned graphic, if you know what I mean. He then stated that his great-grandfather sexually abused him for years until he hit puberty. And he said that he first started viewing CP images when he was only 14 years old. He also stated that when he was just 14 years old, he essayed an 8-year-old friend of his sister's. He also told interviewers that he was intensely aroused by smelling women's undergarments and by sniffing dirty, soiled diapers. So he was eventually sentenced to 7 years in prison, but with his time served, he was actually only given 5.5 years. And this happened back in 2018, which means, if it all worked out in his favor, this year, Shane Pattinson will be released from prison. And after reading this dude's story and learning about what he does, I do not think that he's going to be able to live in a normal society. I don't know how or why he's being released so quickly, but I'm just really afraid for what's going to happen when he's out next. What? Look at that.
This is the 10 days of horror that shocked Pennsylvania. On the 5th of July 2017, Jimmy Patrick left his house. He was a student living with his grandparents, and he was going to Cosmo DiNardo's house to buy marijuana. Cosmo had a history of schizophrenia and had been sectioned the year prior. He was known to police and had been arrested for possessing a gun. Now, this was illegal due to his mental health issues. Jimmy got to Cosmo's house, which was in a remote location. As he got out of the car, Cosmo shot him. He then dug a hole and buried him. The following day, when Jimmy never came home, his granddad reported him missing. Meanwhile, Cosmo was planning other drug deals. He agreed to meet with another student, 19-year-old Dean Finocchiaro. Before picking up Dean, he picked up his cousin, Sean Kratz. Now, Sean was also known to police, and he had many arrests due to theft and robbery. The pair decided to rob Dean instead of selling him substances. Again, Dean was shot and killed at the farmland. They wrapped him in tarp and put him in a metal tank. The same day, Cosmo met Thomas Mio and Mark Sturgis while his cousin stayed at the property. When they got back, Cosmo shot Thomas as he got out of the truck and he fell to the ground. Mark tried to sprint away, but Cosmo shot him and killed him. Cosmo then ran over Thomas with his truck, crushing him to death. He put the two bodies in the metal tank and poured petrol over them and set them alight. That evening and the following day, more of the parents reported their sons missing. Cosmo then contacted somebody in order to sell them Thomas's car. Meanwhile, however, police were tracking the cars of the missing boys. They found Thomas's car at Cosmo's family home. Cosmo was questioned but lied his way out of this. On day 6 of the investigation, police tracked one of the missing boys' phones to Cosmo's family home. Cosmo was arrested on firearms charges and his bail was set to $1 million. His dad actually paid 10% of this in cash and Cosmo was free. Police then managed to rearrest Cosmo because of the fact that he tried to sell a missing boy's car. Shortly after, police discovered the bodies of 3 of the boys on the property. Cosmo confessed to police and then told them where to find Jimmy's body. He got 4 consecutive life sentences and his cousin Sean got life in prison plus 18 to 36 years.
On March 17th in Pensacola, Florida, bridge worker Mason Ponder came across an unusually heavy suitcase. He had no idea that it contained the body of Gannon. Here's his testimony in court.
I was the first one to unzip it. And before we opened it, as soon as we unzipped it, we immediately noticed the smell. That's what hit us first. I remember looking up at Matt, who's quite a bit taller than me, and I said, Matt, I think there's something dead in here. And unfortunately, we do come across, sometimes somebody will throw out a litter of puppies or something in a bag, and that's not uncommon. And it smelled, but it was so strong. It was different that day. So I didn't initially open it, and we kind of thought about what we were going to do first. When we finally went ahead and unzipped the rest of it, the smell was so overpowering. We kind of took a step back, and the first thing I remember seeing was just 2 little feet, and that had little football socks on them. The best I remember, I remember there being little socks on them. And before anything else happened, we couldn't really make out what it was. Matt dumped the suitcase over, and of course we initially immediately knew it was a body. But after looking at it, it was we couldn't tell male or female, boy or girl. We didn't know. A lot of black hair.
Gannon's autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head, a gunshot wound to his jaw, and 12 separate stab wounds. This 11-year-old boy had suffered horrifically at the hands of his evil stepmother. Letitia was charged with the murder of Gannon and faces a total of 13 charges, including first-degree murder, child abuse causing death, and tampering with evidence. In 2022, Letitia changed her plea from guilty to not guilty by reason of insanity, stating that she was insane at the time of Gannon's murder. This delayed the start of a trial because she had to be evaluated multiple times to determine the state of her mental health. In March 2023, the jury was selected, and Letitia's defence claimed that the latest sanity report showed her to be insane at the time of Gannon's murder, claiming that she suffered a major psychotic crack at the time of the brutal killing. The state, however, have argued that the fact she tried to cover the crime up so well and throw off the police shows that she knew right from wrong. The trial continues and you can follow it live over on Law and Crime. Pure evil or mentally ill? In 2012, when Zachary Davis was just 15 years old, he entered his mother's bedroom in the dead of night and struck her over the head 20 times with a sledgehammer.
Did you kill your mother?
Yeah.
And why did you kill her?
She wasn't taking care of my family.
And where did you hit her?
In the head.
Where was she when you did this?
She was asleep.
You've got a sledgehammer in one hand, and you open that door. What's going through your head at that moment?
My mind was pretty much blank. I could just hear the hammer hitting her head.
And what did it sound like?
There was this wet, thumping sound.
Zachary was a very quiet child. He lived with his parents and his older brother Josh, but when he was just 9 years old, his dad died from Lou Gehrig's disease, and it sent Zachary into a downward spiral. He was seen by a psychiatrist and diagnosed with schizophrenia and depressive disorder, and he started therapy. During therapy, Zachary went through the first two phases common in the bereavement process, numbness and depression, but he never made it to the third, recovery. His mother Melanie pulled him out of therapy after just 4 sessions and moved the family to Tennessee, thinking that they were starting a new life. Melanie worked as a paralegal and tried her best to provide a life for her 2 boys, but Zachary was becoming more and more withdrawn. By the time Zachary was 15, he was a complete outcast at school. He often spoke in whispers and wore the same hoodie every day, pulled up around his face. He had an app on his phone about serial killers and another listed torture devices. Zachary showed absolutely no signs of violence outwardly, but beneath the surface, something awful was bubbling. August 10th, 2012 was like any other day. Zachary, his brother and his mum went to watch a movie, and then when they got home, Melanie went up to bed. Once Zachary was sure that his mum was asleep and after his brother had also gone to bed, he grabbed a sledgehammer from the basement, went into his mother's room and started hitting her over the head, again and again, 20 times in total. Melanie actually woke up after the first blow and started gasping for air. She then started to experience seizures while her son hit her over the head again and again until he was sure she was dead. He then went to the family's game room where he doused it in petrol and whiskey and set it on fire, intending to kill his brother Josh. The only problem was that he'd shut the door to the game room and the fire didn't spread as quickly as he'd hoped. Josh escaped and went to a neighbour's house. Zachary was found 10 miles from home and on his arrest he said, "I didn't feel anything when I killed her." Zachary's trial for the murder of his mother began, and when he was asked if he could go back in time, would he do it again, he smirked and said, "Yes, and I'd kill Josh with the sledgehammer too." Zachary showed absolutely zero remorse in the courtroom, but his defence argued that he'd been hearing his father's voice and had been told to kill his mother. His grandma also testified that he hadn't got the help that he needed as he was mentally ill, and he's not a monster, he's a child that made a terrible mistake. But after hearing from Zachary himself, the jury weren't so compassionate. He laughed when he described how heavy the murder weapon was and took joy in describing the sound it made when it hit his mother's head. He was asked why he'd hit her so many times, and his response was, "I wanted to make sure she was dead." The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before reaching a guilty verdict. Zachary was sentenced to life with a minimum of 51 years, meaning he'll be in his mid-60s when he's eligible for parole.
Imagine getting married only to be decapitated by your husband 3 months later. 21-year-old couple Jared and Angie got married in October 2022. Around 4 p.m. on the 11th of January, police were called to their home in Texas. Police made a grim discovery in the pair's bathroom after finding, quote, what appeared to be the head of the victim to be in the shower, end quote. Angie's body was discovered on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. It was actually Jared's poor parents that initially made this discovery after entering the home. They then obviously alerted police to what they found. Jared was arrested and has confessed to killing his wife with a kitchen knife. Jared was actually captured on CCTV, casually stealing a bottle of beer from Angie's workplace just minutes after it's believed that he killed her. Angie's friends have reported to police that the couple's relationship was toxic and Jared was very controlling. Jared's bond is currently set at $500,000. This schoolboy stabbed his teacher to death in front of a classroom full of students. 61-year-old Anne Maguire was a Spanish teacher teaching in Leeds. She'd actually worked at the school for 40 years and she was only 5 months off retirement. However, in April 2014, something absolutely horrific happened. One of her students was 15-year-old Will Cornick. He'd always been described as a smart student who never really caused any trouble. Classmates regarded him as a polite student, but after he got diagnosed with diabetes, his personality seemed to change. In 2013, he tried to join the army, but because of his diagnosis, he was rejected. Being in the army had been his dream, so this was really upsetting for him. After failing to complete his Spanish homework, he was given detention by Anne. He also expressed a wish to her that he wanted to drop Spanish, but she wouldn't let him, which only angered him more. He began to develop a deep-rooted grudge against Anne. Shockingly, he reportedly messaged his friends on Facebook asking if one of them would kill her for him for £10. During one school day, halfway through his Spanish class, Will decided to get up and attack Anne with a knife. The classmates watched on in horror as he chased her out of the classroom. When there, another teacher heard her screams and tried to shield Anne from any more blows from him. Will then allegedly returned to his class and told his classmates how it was a shame that he hadn't killed her. However, Anne did actually pass away from her injuries. Will later admitted that he did plan also to kill 2 other teachers. One of them was actually pregnant at the time. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased, with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.